Happy Friday morning and welcome to summer, Pittsburgh. Hockey season is over, so we can officially move on to, well, what many consider to be the best time of the year. I happen to like spring. Part of the reason why is that the Stanley Cup playoffs go on. But after 2 months, they are all over, and if you're watching this or listening to this on the River's Edge, you probably know that the Penguins have won the Stanley Cup again. The first repeat winners in the NHL since 1997-98 when the Detroit Red Wings pulled it off. Many said it was impossible. It definitely was improbable, but the Penguins did it, defeating the Nashville Predators in 6 games, 2-0, down at Bridgestone Arena on Sunday night. And this seems kind of ironic considering I'm broadcasting on the internet, but I still like to get my Sports Illustrated every week in the mail. So there's Alex Pruitt's cover story. Alex Pruitt, great hockey writer, by the way. Got a chance to talk with him a little bit and express my gratitude for bringing hockey to through the masses through Sports Illustrated. And I'll give you another look at that cover if you are watching here on Facebook Live. That is Sid raising the cup for the third time, for the first time in those beautiful throwback white uniforms that the Penguins wore, both on the ice in Game 6 and in the parade on Wednesday, which, depending on who you would believe, was the largest championship parade in American sports history by attendance. I don't know how they estimate these crowds. 650,000 was the number that the Pittsburgh police gave us. Who are we to dispute it or refute it? So I guess we'll go with that. At any rate, it was really terrific to be out there on the streets and meet a lot of Penguins fans who made the trip, whether it be from, in some cases, Raleigh, North Carolina. I met someone from Florida. I met my parents from West Virginia. They made the trip in. It sounds like a long way, but it's really not. It's just about 35, 40 minutes with no traffic. And, of course, so many from the Pittsburgh region. And you have to appreciate these kinds of moments because even though it seems like the Penguins have a good shot to add another one of those cups, if not more, in the near future with Crosby and Malkin and Chris Letang back on the ice and Matt Murray being so young, and also some of the youthful contributors like Jay Gensel, Connor Sheary, Brian Rust, Oli Mata, the list goes on. All those guys are on board. Brian Dumoulin, Ian Cole, probably going to be back. They're all in the fold, and they have all contributed greatly to the Penguins' 2 Stanley Cup wins over the past 2 years. But you never know what's going to happen. I think in 2009, we all thought that there would be plenty more of these parades down the Boulevard of the Allies and onto Point State Park, as it was on Wednesday. But we had a 7-year break between them, and many of us wondered if the Penguins missed their chance altogether to be a modern dynasty. Well, now they have 3 cups, and as I started talking about, probably prematurely, before the Eastern Conference Final even got started, the Penguins and the Blackhawks are now tied at 3 cups apiece in the salary cap era. And we would all love to see, I would love to see, maybe I'm projecting, I would love to see that ultimate Game 7, if you will, the Stanley Cup Final between Pittsburgh and Chicago to decide who is the best team of the cap era, the best team of the 21st century. All due respect to the Los Angeles Kings, who have a couple of championships. All due respect to the Detroit Red Wings, who won in 02 and 08. In 08, of course, at the expense of the Penguins at Mellon Arena in that tight Game 6, much like the one we saw down in Nashville earlier this week. But I think the Penguins and the Hawks stake their claim not just because they have their cups more recently, but also because they have found ways to maintain a level in the salary cap era. Now, do they have certain advantages the other teams don't? Of course they do. They both tanked or slumped, no matter what you want to call it, at the right time to get high draft picks that could turn the franchise around. For the Penguins, it started in 2003 with Marc-Andre Fleury, and I'll get to him in a moment, but Marc-Andre Fleury, the first overall pick before the lockout, in fact, before the salary cap was instituted, then Sidney Crosby, then Yevgeny Malkin, then Sidney Crosby, even though they arrived in inverse order from their draft order. So those were the 3 that turned the franchise around with help from Jordan Staal, Chris Letang, and the list goes on and on, although those guys at the top were the most important. For the Blackhawks, it was Kane, it was Taves, it was Keith, it was Seabrook, all homegrown talents. Brian Crawford, the I'm sorry, Corey Crawford. I just called him my engineer's name. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well, and apparently I'm doing very well and making a lot more money.
Yeah, you are. So, you are a 2-time Stanley Cup winning goaltender, evidently. You
Fantastic.
You ever play goalie?
I have not, no.
Okay,
so,
yeah. Don't try it. It's not worth it. I don't. Unless you're at that level. We'll get to Brian in a moment. I do want your take, but you can tell I'm still getting back on track from 2 months of Stanley Cup coverage. So it was terrific to be there on site, and even though I had my eyes on the final that was going on, I kept thinking, wow, this will even things up with the Blackhawks, and maybe we can see that collision coming up in a couple of years. Beyond that, though, this championship brings the Penguins to 5 as a franchise, and not just 5 in the 50-year history of the team, but 5 in the past 26 years. So there they are with the Wings and the Devils and the Avalanche, the Kings, the Blackhawks, all multiple Cup winners in this era. And the Penguins are the best since the 90s started. So take that into account and realize how fortunate you are if you're from the area and you grew up watching the Penguins, and you are watching them right now and following them and are big fans of them, what they have done and what they have accomplished. And this current group with Crosby and Malkin leading the way with 3 cups, that puts them not on par quite yet with Gretzky and Messier or Trottier and Bossy and Smith in the New York Islanders dynasty in the early 80s. They still have the standard for consecutive cups in the expansion era with 4 in a row. That's quite a ways away. Just think about how tough that would be to do now. But if you're talking three-peat, and Mike Sullivan is, and his players are too, I don't think that is out of the question. That's certainly in the realm of possibility with where this team is set up. And the sky is the limit. I've seen a lot of people say that let's just enjoy this one, but as Sidney Crosby himself has said, as he said last year, in fact, after they won the Cup in San Jose to end that 7-year championship drought, he said the window is short for players and for teams. He's very much correct. So I fully expect this team to have all the urgency in the world to bring it on back and run it back, to use a basketball term, to do it again. And speaking of basketball, I found it interesting to watch, as I always do, the 2 concurrent playoffs, the NBA and the NHL. And I meant to get into this last week, but now that both playoffs are over with, at a very early date, mind you, it's only June the 16th, but we're already fully fledged into baseball season. The NBA championship, the Larry O'Brien Trophy, has been handed out along with the Stanley Cup. That happened in the span of a couple of days. The Golden State Warriors defeat the Cleveland Cavaliers. 5 games is all it took, after it was a 7-game series last year, with the Cavaliers coming back from 3 games to 1 down. So the NBA playoffs, not only to say utterly lacking in suspense, but when it came to the top 2 teams, whether it be Cleveland in the East or Golden State in the West, those teams combined to lose 1 game on the way to the NBA Finals. Compare that to the Penguins, who had to go 7 against the Capitals in the second round and 7 against the Senators in the third round. But in the NBA, it was a blitzkrieg to the finals. And then in the finals themselves, the Warriors were in trouble a little bit in Game 5, also in Game 4 that the Cavs won, and in Game 3. That very well could have gone Cleveland's way, but only one of those games went to the Cavaliers. So the Warriors, who held serve at home, got it done, finished things up in 5 games. There was never really much doubt in that final series, much as there was never really much doubt in the playoffs leading up to that. And I wonder, is this good for a sport when there are 2 super teams that come together, and then even in the final, one team is clearly superior to the other? Or is it better to have it the NHL's way, where all these games are close, and while there might not be an adequate foil for the Penguins, to put it that way, there was not a team of their level, all due respect to the Predators and the Senators. But the best team the Penguins played was in the second round of the playoffs, and that's partially the fault of the NHL for setting up the divisional playoffs the way they are right now. We've talked about that in the past too, but is it good for the only team with real star power in the Final Four to be the Penguins? The only team that's left there that can really move the needle in terms of ratings is one. I think that's that's a dicey way to go about your business. But also, I heard from so many basketball fans that were disgruntled with the state of the NBA playoffs, that there was nothing much to watch in the first 3 rounds, and it's tough to disagree with that unless you're talking, say, Celtics Wizards, which went 7 games. That might have been the most compelling series in terms of suspense in the first 3 rounds. So for me, it's a dichotomy. Is it balanced, or do you balance out the greatness of the Cavaliers and the Warriors with the overall parity of the Stanley Cup playoffs and say it's essentially a wash? You could argue that, because not only did the Stanley Cup final do quite well in TV ratings, just one measure, but still a very important measure. It was the highest rated series that was not involving an original 6 team, not involving one of those really traditional hockey markets in Chicago or Boston or New York or Detroit. It was Pittsburgh-Nashville. Pittsburgh, the 22 market in the country. Nashville, the 29 market in the country in terms of ranking, I believe, on last check. And Nashville, a completely untested market. But whether it be the Penguins' star power and their chance to go for back-to-back, or Sidney Crosby being a name that even the casual sports fan recognizes, or the novelty of seeing Nashville lit up with hockey fever for the first time, all those things maybe came together to give the NHL a surprising ratings win. Or on the NBA side, 2 all-time great teams going together, if you're talking about regular season results and their ability to dominate the competition in the playoffs. The star of stars and LeBron James, Steph Curry right there with him. If you're talking best players in the NBA, same with Kevin Durant, the super team that the Warriors assembled. 2 different ways to go about it, but both championship series drew quite well. However, if you're talking the playoffs, in general, that's 2 months to sell, and that's 2 months in order to put your sport on the national stage. And I think generally hockey did better than basketball in that way. But then again, basketball remains a much more popular sport to the masses here in America. So any kind of success the NHL has is relative to its position still as the 4th most popular professional sport in North America. That's just the way it is. And as someone who wants the sport to grow, the sport of hockey I'm talking about, I always want to see more offense, better finals matchups. I think Penguins Blackhawks would definitely do that. Maybe that's part of the reason why I want to see it, because of assuredly how many people would tune in for that, whether it be in Pittsburgh or Chicago or across the country, because both teams have that name recognition. That's just the way I think. I'm never really satisfied with one thing or another. And now I can bring in Brian Crawford, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Brian on the ones and
Always
twos
enjoy
once
it.
again here in Millvale. I want to give a shout out to the Millvale studios for providing the workspace for us. What was your feeling? I know you're a sports fan, but I also feel you have a better idea than I do of how the casual fan might feel. You traffic more in the non-sports fan circles than I do. So what was your feeling on how much of the attention span of just people here in Pittsburgh that Penguins Predators got?
Oh, it was huge, and you could tell based on the Facebook reaction of people who didn't care about hockey, people who don't like hockey, or people who prefer the NBA, because they're just like, it was almost like a jealousy that was coming from their lips, like, oh, hockey sucks, things like that, because that's all they're inundated with was hockey talk for the last few months. So
it got a little annoying for them, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. So so I think the reaction, I thought it was a really strong reaction. I mean, obviously the parade is always huge, so you could tell that people were just energized by it, and I think I think hockey is obviously hockey's a huge thing here in Pittsburgh, but I think as it continues, as we can keep winning, it's just going to really cement itself as being one of the being a mainstay. And I've said for quite some time, I'm on record as saying that I think eventually within the city limits, the Penguins will overtake the Steelers as the #1 team in town.
I think it might be a matter of time just because of the generational
That's what
thing.
I'm thinking, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Similar to how we've seen the Pirates' popularity peter out, a lot of it has to do with them not winning for 20 years. But even when they did win, it still feels like there's a certain segment of the market that just didn't grow up with the Pirates being any good, so they have a hard time thinking about them and caring about them when they're not good.
Yeah.
And that's what you see with the Penguins and the Steelers, is that when those two teams are bad, people are really angry, and they're still relevant. Is what I'm saying. Maybe at Heinz Field there's a few more empty seats. Maybe at PPG Paints Arena, if the Penguins ever had a losing season at PPG Paints Arena, then we would see the attendance start to suffer. But I still sense that they're more of a part of the fabric of the community. And I was just talking national, but we can talk Pittsburgh too. Just within
on a national level.
Limits.
Yeah, I mean, on a national level, I don't know. For some reason, I think it's just the culture we live in. People like flashy play, and I mean, that's what I love. I do love that about the Penguins, but hockey, you get a lot of that, nose grinding, and it's a different style of play, and I think people just want that, the flash and the glamour. And
well, the Penguins do bring that in a sport, like you say, though. The sport itself, scoring is still pretty low. It's not quite as low as it was before the full season lockout, but it's gone down consistently, and it's stayed stagnant throughout this decade for the most part. And I still think there needs to be more scoring and more scoring chances for hockey to really take off, and for people to buy into the product, and not just tune in once in a while to see, Sidney Crosby's going for his third cup and the Penguins are exciting. If you don't get that matchup, if it were Anaheim-Nashville, I'm really curious to see what the ratings were. Of course, it didn't turn out that way.
Mm-hmm.
But when it was Anaheim-Ottawa 10 years ago, it was terrible. It was the worst cup final ever.
Wow.
With the asterisk of saying that Ottawa's a Canadian team, and you're not going to get those ratings. Don't count for NBC is what I'm saying.
That's true. Yeah.
So you put an asterisk next to that one. But I'm always thinking about ways to make the game more palatable for the public, to make it more appealing. And I watch these NBA Finals games. Did you watch any of the NBA Finals?
I did not. No,
Okay.
I just watched the Penguins, and that's about it. We've our intern Max. You watched the NBA Finals?
Yeah, bring him in. Let's see.
I tried to. Matt, I was going to ask you, such a dynamic team like Golden State.
Yeah.
Do you think that does better for the NBA, or it could
Absolutely.
have been easily predicted before the playoffs began what the two teams would be? So I just wanted to ask you how you felt about that.
Well, I think the fact that they score a ton of points is fun. For me, they go up and down the court. Just basketball generally has evolved into more of a shooter's game as opposed to a post-up, bang inside type of a game. So I think that's appealing to the masses. It leads to more highlights, which helps NBA clips get play on Twitter and Facebook and all the places where people tend to congregate these days. It's the second screen experience, and I think hockey needs more opportunities for that, as opposed to just guys grinding in the corner or in front of the net. I know I appreciate that as a hockey fan, but I don't know if that really resonates with people who haven't played the sport, especially. That's the tough part
also,
for me.
I think you can appreciate it to a point. I mean, it gets to a point where it's a little too much.
A little tedious.
And
yeah,
even
right.
even a hockey fan is just like, come on, do something. I don't want to watch 60 minutes of grinding along the boards. A little bit, adds to the game, but
yeah, variety is good,
Yeah.
right? I think that's where the NBA has it right, though. They may lean too much toward offense right now, just because some of the scores in the finals were they're outrageous. I thought being on pace for 150 points. I don't know if that's that compelling, because all of a sudden now the defense doesn't have a chance, as long as you keep it even. And right now I think the pendulum is tilted too far toward the defense, and star power is always going to sell too. Yeah, like I said, you have Durant, you have Steph Curry, you have LeBron James, you have Kyrie Irving to a degree, and the fact that it was the third straight matchup, I think it was a perfect storm for the NBA. The third straight matchup between the Cavs and the Warriors, I think that all helps quite a bit. And maybe if you have a situation like Penguins Red Wings from last decade when it was back to back, I thought that was pretty cool. So,
yeah. That was exciting.
It's nice to see the teams adjust to each other and go at it again. I think that is always compelling in a championship series.
Yeah.
So, thanks, guys. I appreciate the input. It's tough for me to step outside of my little bubble here, in my media bubble, number one, and my hockey bubble, number two, and appreciate what basketball has going for it. And like I said, the playoffs didn't seem very compelling. I didn't watch a single game until the NBA Finals, but then I did watch the Finals because I thought it was a high-profile, exciting matchup. Whereas the hockey, I think sometimes with the attrition that goes on, all the injuries that occur, the best hockey itself happens in the first round. Everyone's adrenalized, and every team is relatively healthy. Maybe not the Penguins this year; they were a special case, but for the most part, they have energy, and you see a better up and down pace just because they're not worn out. It's such a strenuous sport, and I think hockey has to worry about that in the future, too. The game does tend to slow down in the final round.
One thing I also wanted to mention, I put this out on Facebook. Remember just a few years ago when Jim Rutherford didn't know how to manage a team, and
It was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, didn't know how to win either.
The man adjusted. I give him credit. I always talk about Clint Hurdle changing and adapting to the data in the game. I think Jim Rutherford did that too.
Yeah.
And whether it be watching his team get skated out of the building in that series against the Rangers 2 years ago, or whether it be looking at some of the newer information that's out there and saying he didn't have enough players who were driving possession, or just looking at the state of the game and seeing that speed is needed. But he revamped this team. He tailored them in order to help out guys like this. Sid, who can still fly, Malkin, who can still fly, Chris Letang, not in these playoffs, wasn't active, but he plays a skating game. And when you tailor the supporting staff, the supporting cast to those players, it helps you win. It's not a guarantee when you have stars that you win, as we saw from 2010 to 2015. But if you do set it up the right way, then who knows? The sky is the limit right now. And I think that's the case for the Penguins. So thank you, boys. We'll take a break here on Gike's Got Game. When I return, a little bit more chatter about the parade and the coverage of that, and whether we go a little bit overboard with the TMZ-ization of sports. I'm more of just a hardcore sports guy, so you probably know where I'm going to stand on that, but I'm open to other perspectives. We'll get to that in just a moment on The River's Edge.
Here's this week's music scene update from Sound Scene Express. I'm Max Knott. Friday, June 16th, local garage pop rockers Recluse dropped their long-awaited debut album, OK Recluse, and marked the occasion with a release show at James Street Gastropub and Speakeasy with special guests Buffalo Rose at $5 a ticket, open at 8 p.m. James Street is the place to be this weekend, continuing with Saturday the 17th, where Hugh Twyman of Hugh Shows presents a 14-hour-long tribute concert to the psychedelic music of 1967. 25 acts will perform, including the Knox Boys and Nameless in August, starting at 12:30 p.m. The free event is accepting donations to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU. Go to jamesstreetgastropub.com for more information on both of these events. From Sound Scene Express, Pittsburgh's music and print, you're listening to Pittsburgh's voice for local music, The River's Edge.
Back for the second segment of Gike's Got Game. I am your titular host, Matt Gajtka, and this is The River's Edge. Every Friday morning from 10 to 11 a.m. Now new time, by the way. We are sticking with this, and we like it. I like it a lot. I'm a little more bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 10 than I was at 8, so I appreciate the move and hope you appreciate it too if you get an opportunity to watch live, listen live, or via the archive, via the podcast page. That's riversedgepgh.com, and Brian Crawford running everything on the technical side, as he does once again and has done for much of the history of this show. We're working our way toward 2 years here. My first show was early July 2015. It's been fun. It's flown by, as you always hear people say. That's a cliche, and I'll be banning one a little bit later on in this show, but it feels true to me, so I'll lay that out there. Quick segment here before we, in fact, talk some baseball. Yes, we have to move on. We have to look forward, and we will be discussing the Pirates and give you a summer primer if you haven't been paying attention to what the Buccos are up to. Alex Stumpf of The Point of Pittsburgh and various other entities will be joining me. He recently had a stint at Fangraphs, too, one of the best websites on the internets, especially when it comes to sports, and one of the real authorities for baseball. So happy to see him get that platform for a short time. But he writes for a variety of sites, Pirates Talk Now, in addition to The Point of Pittsburgh. He'll be with me in just a few minutes. As I mentioned, short segment here, though, as I ponder the coverage of the parade, and plenty of the Penguins were certainly having a good time out in public. They were throwing back beers as they paraded down Grant Street and then the Boulevard and then Commonwealth and then on to Point State Park. Some of them looked worse for the wear, like Ole Mata and Justin Schultz. They were definitely having a ball, and they were switching from Yingling to Miller to to Coors Light. A lot of high water content beers you might notice on a hot day in Pittsburgh. I think that was a wise choice, and I wrote about it. I think that was all part of the color of the scene, and the guys were well behaved. I think, for having no sleep for 48 hours and having quite a bit of booze in their system. So I applaud them for drinking responsibly and for the most part just having a good old time. As the coverage of that event went on, though, and as we went into day two, sometimes I feel like we can go too far, and I just don't want these guys to feel that we're prying into their lives. I would love them to continue to open up and celebrate in public and not be afraid to have a few beers in front of their adoring public and get loose. So there were a lot of questions to them at yesterday's locker room clean-out day, which I covered for DK Pittsburgh Sports. And I almost wrote about it. Like I said, I wrote about all of the debauchery, so to speak, on Wednesday as part of my parade coverage. But I felt like 2 days of it was a little much. And I don't know if maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just being old-fashioned in this way. But I'm in it for the hockey. These guys are famous for playing hockey. And I just asked hockey questions. Others didn't. And I'm not going to besmirch them one way or the other. I just don't want to make these guys any more reclusive than athletes already are these days. And I think if we keep asking them about, say, Ole Mata taking a nap on the porch of his apartment, and one of his teammates caught that, put that on Snapchat, and they all had a good laugh about it, including Ole. He was a good sport about it too. But I felt like I didn't want to cross that line. Maybe that's just me. Like I said, maybe I'm being old before my time here. I'm just 32 years old, so I suppose I'm still even considered a millennial in this case. And the players didn't seem to have a problem with it for the most part, for being asked about their celebration and their escapades. And again, it was in public, so maybe it's all fair game. But I'm always going to lean toward, this is just me, I'm always going to lean toward talking about the sport and whether certain guys are coming back or what they feel about their chances to return if they are free agents, or to talk to Marc-Andre Fleury and get his final thoughts on his 14-year career in Pittsburgh. For me, that's a lot more compelling. I'm just different from some other people, and that's all I'm going to say about that. And I know that certain aspects of the coverage, saw a lot of blogs posting about which Penguin won the parade, so to speak. I think it's funny. I'm just not going to write about it. If you're looking for it, look elsewhere. Would be the gist of my statement here after seeing all of it and really absorbing all the coverage, whether it be more about what the players were saying, what they were doing, and then the immediate aftermath and how they came down. And I'm sure there were quite a few hangovers to be nursed yesterday. And I think we saw some players looking a little bit worn out after what was really a 3-day celebration, and much deserved for them. Again, I was really happy to see them cut loose and enjoy themselves in public. I think we can all agree that they deserve to celebrate responsibly, of course, and without harming others, but to celebrate as they will. Let's take another break here on Gajtka Got Game. When I come back, we'll talk some baseball with Alex Stumpf. Yes, we are switching gears, our first real baseball talk here in a few weeks. As you can imagine, the Penguins have taken up most of the oxygen here in this room and around the city of Pittsburgh. That's about to change, though. We're going to get you set for the summer and for the Pirates having the stage all to themselves. In fact, they host the Cubs this weekend at PNC Park. This is Gajtka Got Game on the River's Edge.
George. 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 Come to George at Hambones, 8 p.m., June 24th, for a mix of comedy, drag, improv, music, spoken word, and possibly a tutorial on how to spay and neuter your pets at home. Come join us June 24th at Hambones for George.
Hello, back here in Millvale. I'm Matt Gajtka, and this is Gajtka Got Game. Segment 3 means let's bring in a special guest. He is a writer for The Point of Pittsburgh, Pirates Talk Now, and various other entities covering the Buccos. His name is Alex Stumpf, and the first-time guest here on the show, but very well acquainted with Alex and his work. Last year, I shared the PNC Park press box with him for, well, it seemed like all 81 home games. Alex, how many did you cover last year? You were there, it seemed like every day. I'm having a hard time getting Alex on the line here. Let me try something else. In the meantime, a little bit more about Alex. He was a fan-sided writer in residence, or residency writer. So he got a chance to express himself, do some analysis on that platform for about a month. Let's see if we can get Alex back on the line. In fact, I'll have to give him a ring back. So give me just 1 second here. You're seeing radio in action, folks.
This is it. This is what happens when it's live and exciting.
Gotta love it, man.
So
the signal here in Millvale is typically really good. So
yeah, so we should
let's try that again. Let's see if we have Alex. Alex, are you with us?
Hello.
Hey, sorry about that. Operator error on my part. It happens.
No problem.
I was just trying to ask you, how many games did you cover last year? Because I felt like every time I looked to my left in the PNC Park press box, you were right there alongside.
Oh, I'll go conservative there with about 70. I missed a stretch in the middle for vacation. But
Okay. We'll forgive it. So
it just felt like more.
it always does in baseball sometimes. It's an everyday thing, even if you are just doing the home games. Now, I mentioned your gig with Fangraphs, so let's start there. That's a really interesting setup. It was a writer residency program, wasn't it? And it was during the month of May.
Yeah, it was during the month of May. I write for a site called The Point of Pittsburgh, which has a business relationship with Fangraphs.
Okay.
And they were looking for young writers to come in, let them get a platform on a national scale for about a month. My editor suggested me, and it worked out. I ended up writing 7 stories for them. Most of them were very well received. So it was a fun experience. I'd never done anything nationally before. It was different writing for stat heads as opposed to just regular baseball fans.
Now, I have a couple of questions for you. How young do you have to be considered a young writer? What was the requirement?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm sticking with young at 25.
Okay, that works for me. I consider that young, definitely 7 years younger than I am. And secondly, how did you change your style of reporting? I know you have an analytical mindset anyway, but how did you tailor it for that Fangraphs audience, which, as I've referenced their work in the past, I often go to the site. I love the digging into the data. So what did you do to change your style there?
Well, I've actually been changing my style for the better part of 2 or 3 years, trying to get to a Fangraphs
I see.
style. I've read their stuff. I've really respected it, and I figure that's going to be an end game, a way I could, actually make an impact in baseball writing. So it was more trial by fire, I guess, than anything there.
Sure. What would you consider your style then? Do you like to mix the traditional narratives with some of the advanced data that's out there?
I think you have to do that. You have to appeal to both ends, or you're going to be alienating too much of a demographic to really be successful.
What do you think about the Pirates this year? Now, get people caught up if you can. Could you give a summary of the first 7, or pardon me, more like 9 or 10 weeks of the Major League Baseball season? I think the casual fan will say, well, I know they're under 500, but they might not know that the NL Central is wide open this year, and they're only, was it 4 games back of first? 5
It's
games
5
back.
today,
Yeah.
but basically the same. The joke I saw on Reddit was, I think it was from a Cincinnati Reds fan even, was it's the Comedy Central this year, because
That's an old
pretty
joke,
much,
definitely. It reminds me of the late 90s when the Pirates were trying to contend.
in the NL works. Yeah, I mean, it's old jokes, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been trying. I mean, I'm sure casual fan knows about Starling Marte's suspension and Andrew McCutcheon starting the year struggling. Garrett Cole's hitting a skid for about 4 starts in the middle there. Taeyon's cancer diagnosis. Jung-Ho Kang still being in Korea. Amazingly, all things considered, they should feel fairly fortunate that they're 5 games out and things are finally starting to look up. I mean, Taeyon's back. That's unbelievably important, not just for morale, but just having a third reliable major league starter to go along with Cole and Nova. McCutchen has caught fire ever since going down into the 6th hole. This stretch of the next 10 games, I think, is going to tell if the Pirates are really at all contenders, because they have 3 against the Cubbies at home, and they don't even hit Leicester in that 3-game set, so they might have the pitching advantage all 3 times.
Yeah.
4 in Milwaukee, which has been a house of horrors, but I think
they swept them last year when I was up there in 4 games, so
yeah,
take that.
Traditionally a bad place to go, but
yeah,
recency bias. And then 3 in St. Louis. I mean, they got to leapfrog all those teams to get into the playoffs, because no one from the NL Central is getting a wild card this year.
Doesn't seem like it, does it? Yeah, the Brewers are a surprise first place team. Like you said, the Cubs, disappointing, under 500 at 32 and 33. Remember, they had 50-some wins at this point last year, so this is quite the drop-off from the pace for them. And the Cardinals just a half game ahead of the Pirates, who are 30 and 36 going into the weekend. So you laid out some of those reasons for optimism. Are there any others? I know McCutchen has looked a lot more like himself recently, too. Are you seeing anything there that you believe is real and long-lasting?
It seems like mostly he's enjoying just being down in the order. He said during an interview like a couple weeks ago that he just likes not having to worry about batting in the first inning, which
is interesting.
He won an MVP batting in the first inning, but I'm sure there's been a lot of mental changes from there since then. A lot has been asked of him, both on the franchise, trade rumors, just a lot of stuff that's out of his control. I don't blame him for enjoying, taking a little bit of a back seat there. But yeah, he seems to be driving the ball a lot better. I'll admit I'm a little lazy so far, and I haven't looked into bat speed or anything, but it's like it might be increasing. Halfway through the year, he was fairly league average, which isn't him.
You're talking exit velocity, right?
Actually, swing speed.
Oh, swing speed. Okay, I didn't even know that was available to be looked at these days, but his signature, though, for so long was the quick bat and line drives all over the park. I'm still not sure if I'm seeing that. I see so many of his hard hit balls to the left side. For me, if he's able to regain somewhat of that MVP form, he's going to be hitting gap to gap and, well, heck, line to line. I think we've seen that in his career when he's on one of those hot stretches. So that may not be possible now. He may be past that stage of his career, but that's the way I feel on it. What are your feelings on where he is taking the ball where it's pitched? Because, like I said, for me, that's a distinguishing factor for him.
For a long time, you're right. He hit that center. That was his bread and butter. I think we're still just looking to see if McCutchen's not a 200 hitter.
No,
he
I think we can agree on that.
Will never be a 200 hitter. That's just a bad streak. Last year he hit, I believe, 267 in that ballpark, around there, and now he's around 250. So is this hot streak just him getting back to 267, or is it, because he's a 300 hitter again? And I think that's going to even itself out, I think, in a little bit, either one way or the other. But I think there is cause for optimism there. I think I don't want to say old Kutch, because the defensive center is still a red flag, but
yeah,
the offense needs his bat, and I think he's finally started to come through lately.
We're talking Pirates, giving you a summer primer. Summer has officially begun in Pittsburgh, not because we're getting close to the solstice. It's because the Penguins are done playing, and now people can turn their attention fully, if they're into Pittsburgh pro sports, which I think most of you are, to the Pirates. Well, what have those nights been like? I experienced a few of them last year, Alex, at PNC Park. What have those nights been like when the Penguins have been playing a big game? It's got to be tough for the players, I think, sometimes at PNC, when there's just no one in the stands, there's no atmosphere. I wonder how conducive that is to winning. I realize they're professionals, but it has to affect them at some level, I would imagine. What are your feelings on that?
We cut out there for a little bit. Was that about whenever the Penguins and Pirates are playing at the same time?
Yeah, I know that it's unavoidable, but how much of that do you think can affect the players? I know they talk about not worrying about the atmosphere and all that, but I think all things being equal, they'd prefer to be in a rabid atmosphere, whether it's cheering against them or for them.
I'm sure they do. I mean, you said it, no athlete's ever going to admit that, a lack of home crowds bothering them. It was surreal during Game 5 whenever, Pirates lost, I believe, like 7-1 that night. And
sounds about right.
Everyone in the stands, I guess, just knew whenever a Penguin player scored because, Juan Marinez is, getting ready to set up for the pitch, and the entire crowd erupts because it's 5-0 now. Well, the main problem is on why there hasn't been fans in the stands. It's been because they went from a 98-win team to a 78-win team and are under 500 now. It's a lot easier to draw whenever you're winning. And I feel like there's a little bit of, well, not a little bit, there's always been a little bit of disenfranchisement towards the Nutting family and ownership, which I think only increased whenever they spent an offseason basically doing nothing. I think they could have sold either rebuilding by trading Kutch or going for it all and getting a Quintana, and they ended up doing neither, just sticking with the past, which it's hard to sell that whenever you won 78 games the year before.
Understandable. I definitely get all of it, and at least they're past that point now where the Penguins can take some of their thunder away, and maybe the Penguins did them a favor too, because there were some ugly moments in the first 10 weeks, and now, as I said, they're still at least nominally within range of the NL Central lead, despite having 3 teams ahead of them. Now, let's turn the other way before we wrap this up, Alex, and thanks for joining me this morning. Reasons for pessimism, reasons that it'll just be status quo and they'll stay below 500. What do you think is the biggest reason that outcome will come to pass if it does?
Just not enough time. Like I said, the 10 games stretch right here, if they end up going 3-7 and 4-6, even if they catch fire after that, that's a lot of ground to make up against just NL teams. And they're kind of running out of time because it's not just September 30th or October 1st, whenever this season ends. It's July 31st. They got to, they have to prove at the trade deadline that they could actually win. Because if they don't, I could see Tony Watson getting traded. Juan Nicasio is also an impending free agent who would be very desirable. Obvious answer would be Andrew McCutchen. Garrett Cole's name has come up a lot during this trade rumor season. So it's a battle against the clock. And they are, even with the cases of optimism, they are still a 30-36 team. That's not where you want to be.
No,
I think they're
that's on
better
pace
than
for
a
about
30-36
wins.
team, but
yeah. Well, and like you say, the season is perhaps on the brink right now because of the lack of quality in the NL Central. The wild card is not a feasible possibility, so you have to win the division. And the 3 teams that are ahead of them, they have ahead of them immediately in the schedule right now, starting with the Cubs this weekend. Alex will be down at PNC Park to cover that for the Point of Pittsburgh. Also contributor to Pirates Talk Now. You can find him on Twitter at Alex J. Stumpf, and that's Stumpf. Don't forget the F at the end. Alex, thanks again. We'll see you down at the ballpark.
Thank you.
That's Alex. I'm Matt. Final break. When we come back, I'll ban a cliche and wrap things up with the final number. This is Gajtka Game on the River's Edge.
This place.
Hey, listen up for some sweet pizza discounts. The River's Edge is partnering with Frank's Pizza and Chicken to offer you 10% off your ZA. That's short for pizza.
Seriously? ZA?
What?
Anyway, mention you heard this ad and Frank's will give you 10% off your order of $15 or more.
Oh my god, have you tried their famous buffalo chicken pizza?
Oh, don't even get me started. Can you name all 4 Frank's locations?
Millville, obviously. Troy Hill, Shaler, and North Hills.
Gold star. Anyway, support the River's Edge Radio Network by ordering from Frank's Pizza and Chicken the next time you get hungry for some ZA. And don't forget to mention you heard this ad so you get your 10% off. Go to frankspizzachicken.com for more info.
Offer good for a limited time. Order mostly $15 or more before taxes. Cannot be combined with other discounts or offers, other legal jargon and whatnot.
Hello, final segment of Gajtka Game here on the River's Edge. That pizza promo always makes me hungry, especially as we approach lunchtime here. I'll have to rectify that as soon as I get out of here in the Millvale studio. But some things to take care of. Of course, if you listen to this show, you expect certain things, and one of those things is ban the cliche. I skipped it last week due to just a glut of content. I hadn't been in the studio for a while, so let's do some catching up. And let's ban a cliche. Let's talk about some language that needs to be expunged from all of our vocabularies, in sports at least. How about legacy? It's a harmless word, but a legacy at stake, that's a popular thing to say if you are a hot take artist in the world of sports. David Fleming of ESPN.com was such a hot take artist a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was last week, in fact, after the Penguins lost Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final. He said that Sidney Crosby and Yevgeny Malkin had their legacies at stake with how the rest of the playoffs were going to go for them. First of all, that's ridiculous. They were right at the top of the NHL scoring list at the time. Second of all, they just won the championship last year. They're multi-cup winners. I think even if they didn't win this one, they were secured as two of the all-time best players in hockey history. Even if they didn't have 2 cups, I think. Just look at their numbers. Look at how they produced. Yes, their team has had some failures in the playoffs, but this isn't the NBA, and that's where I think this type of thing comes from. In the NBA, in basketball, which we discussed in the first segment here today, a star player can have an outsized influence on how a game or a season goes. And we have these referendums on players based on how their team does. I would argue even that's unfair in basketball, even though you can put the ball in LeBron James's hands every time, or Steph Curry's, or Kevin Durant's. The list goes on and on. There are several guys who could turn a season with just a couple of dribbles and a shot in basketball. Not the case in hockey. You need support with your line mates, with your defense, with your goaltending, power play, penalty kill. It all has to be there in order for you to win. Yes, it helps to have stars, as we've seen with the Penguins and the Blackhawks. 6 cups total in the past 9 seasons. But it's not the only thing, as we saw with the Penguins between 2010 and 2015. You can't expect stars to carry you like you can in other sports. So to say that an individual's legacy is on the line or at stake because of how their team does in a round of playoffs, it's a fallacy. It's a cliche, and especially in hockey, it doesn't seem to fit. So that's my cliche to ban. And it's not just Mr. Fleming, whose other writing I've enjoyed at ESPN.com. I'm not sure where he was coming from there. I suppose we can all disagree with each other in reasonable fashion, and I had a lot of problems with that. Also, comparing Crosby and Malkin's numbers to Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux when goalies were glorified defensemen and scoring was almost at twice the rate that it is right now in your typical game. It was complete bunk, and you can dispatch that out of hand. I was actually encouraged to see NHL fans across the spectrum. That story united them against it. I didn't think anything could unite hockey fans who are very tribal and provincial in terms of their teams and their favorite players. So there you go. Something can bring us all together. Maybe that's hope for us yet as a nation. Finally, my final number, not to be redundant, is 5, the number of cups the Penguins have won. But thanks to a subscriber to DKPittsburghSports.com who emailed me this week, that 5 could be inflated. So the final number really is 3 in terms of cup equivalents. Now, follow me here. This is a very basic way to weigh cups in terms of the era in which they're won. Now, the Penguins have won 3 of their cups in a 30-team league. They have won 2 of their cups in a 22 and a 21-team league, respectively. So the theory from Darren Vitapil, who emailed me this cup equivalent formula, is that the more teams in the league, the harder it is to win. And I always argued this when I lived in Michigan, and I would hear about the Red Wings' 11 championships after 2008, when they beat the Penguins especially. Believe me, I heard quite a bit about that. But 7 of their championships occurred in the days of the original 6, when you only had to beat 5 teams. You only had to be better than 5 teams in order to win. For me, those should count less. It's glorified house league in my mind, and I used those exact words when I was in Michigan for quite some time. You can imagine how popular that went over. I get it. The Wings couldn't help that they were just in a 6-team league, but it should count for more, shouldn't it, when you win with more competition, with other teams to play? And when you can't hang on to as much star talent as you could back in those days. So the Penguins have 5 cups, but when you weigh it, when you adjust it accordingly, they move from 6th all-time, tied with the Oilers in terms of Raw championships in the NHL, to 3rd, and that's where the final number comes in at 3. If you adjust, the Penguins are still behind the Red Wings by about an adjusted cup, give or take, and the Canadiens, who have 24 overall, are still far and away the greatest franchise if you're talking championships won. So that'll take a while to catch up. In fact, it'll take the Penguins, according to this formula, 5 more cups to pass the Canadiens. Wow, that'll be quite the task indeed. But when you weigh the idea that I think it's indisputable, it's tougher to win now than it was in the days of the original 6 or the days of 12 teams in the 70s as things expanded on further and further. I mentioned it was 21 in 1991 when the Penguins won their first cup. Those should count a little to a lot less than the cups that are won now, just based upon the raw numbers. I know it's not a perfect comparison, it's not a perfect formula, but in my mind, and I think in many other people's minds, it's a valid way to look at it. And so, still, hail to Montreal, hail to Detroit, but Pittsburgh is gaining on you, my friends. And with this recent cup, they surpassed the Blackhawks in terms of cup equivalents. They surpassed the Oilers. They are right there next to the top traditional franchises in the history of professional hockey. So, in the words of Paul Steigerwald last year, pinch yourselves, Pittsburgh. I think that was very appropriate. They have risen to a level I don't know if any of us could have anticipated 10 years ago when Sidney Crosby and Yevgeny Malkin were just getting started here in town. Thanks for watching and listening to Gajk's Got Game. Signing off for another week here on the River's Edge in Millvale. Thank you to Alex Stumpf for joining me. This has been Matt Gajtka reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. I'll talk to you next week right here on the River's Edge.